tell you a story of a hero in the Bible that many of us haven't heard before. This is a story of a woman named Esther. In a town called Susa, in the Empire of Persia, lived a peasant Jewish girl named Esther. Now, Esther and the rest of Jewish people lived in Persia as refugees. They were foreigners in the land that they had currently lived in. Now, Esther personally was an orphan. She had lost both of her parents at a young age and was raised by her cousin named Mordecai, who was a really good man. Now, at the time, a man named Xerxes was king, and Xerxes ruled over Persia, and so also the Jewish people in Susa. Now, at the time, Xerxes was looking for a new wife. Xerxes had recently banished his wife, and so was looking for a new person he could call queen. So Xerxes had all of his servants go out and find all of the young women and bring them back to him for beauty school, basically. So Esther was one of the young women who was chosen to go back to the palace to be seen by the king. Let me just pause right there and say that that's messed up. Any part of history, that is not how someone should ask someone to marry them. Just saying. Girls, if you are watching this, you are not just some object that some man can marry. Okay, moving on. Now, Esther didn't need to do much to gain favor with the king. Xerxes just liked her. He saw her and quickly Esther gained favor with the king. I like to think it's because she's friendly and kind. So Xerxes quickly made Esther queen. Meanwhile, Xerxes made a man named Haman his chief nobleman. Now, Haman was a prideful man. So on the day that Xerxes named him chief nobleman, he wanted everyone watching to bow. Standing there in this ceremony of making him nobleman was Mordecai. Mordecai happened to be there that day to check on Esther, who was in the palace. But Mordecai, being a bold Jewish man, refused to bow to Haman. Mordecai had it in his soul that he would not praise or bow to anyone except his God. Now, Haman did not like this. Haman did not like the fact that Mordecai wouldn't bow, and it made him so mad that the thought of only killing Mordecai for this offense was just not enough. And so Haman, knowing his power, knowing his position over the king, came to King Xerxes with this order and decree to kill all Jewish people on the same day. He made this decree that said all Jewish people, young, old, male, female, everyone would be annihilated on a single day. And now Xerxes, because he trusted Haman, didn't think much of it, didn't read it much, and just signed it away, and so it was decreed. On the 13th day of the 12th month, all of the Jewish people were going to be killed. As you can imagine, all the Jewish people then start to mourn and freak out and were terrified. It says that there was communal wailing and crying. People were scared. It says that the whole Jewish people in that town fasted. They were all, they didn't know what to do, and so they turned to God. But they rubbed ashes on their foreheads and put sackcloths on, because as a symbol of true and deep mourning and sadness. So as you can imagine, this time immediately following after they heard the decree would have been one of deep darkness, of deep sadness for the Jewish people, and uncertainty. But God had a plan. The Jewish people didn't realize that God was at work in the very palace itself. You see, the Jewish people didn't know that this new queen, Esther, was Jewish. In fact, Xerxes and Haman didn't know she was Jewish either. See, Esther kept this part of her identity a secret, which ended up being a huge blessing to the whole nation. because they didn't realize that the very queen herself was Jewish. So when the decree went out, Esther and Mordecai decided to make a plan. They turned to God. And Esther sent messengers back and forth from the king's gate and from her room to talk to Mordecai so that they could make a plan. In a very famous line, Mordecai encourages Esther. He says, "Who knows, but that you came to this royal position for such a time as this." Then Esther tells Mordecai to go back to all of the Jewish people and to have them fast for 3 days. She says, have them all fast and turn to God, and she would do the same. And so for 3 days, Esther, Mordecai, and the whole Jewish community in Susa fasted. They fasted. After that 3rd day, Esther says what she would do. She says, "When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." You see, going to the king at this time was a huge offense. Even just approaching a king would have been worthy of the death penalty. So questioning the king or asking the king to take back an order that he already made would surely mean death. And so Esther agrees with Mordecai that maybe God put her there for such a time as this. And she decides that even if it means death, she would go and make her attempts to try to save the Jewish nation. And so she goes. So she boldly goes to the king. She makes this huge banquet and invites both the king and Haman to join her there. And to her surprise, they both come willingly, and the king does not kill her, but he listens to her. He listens to her, ends up killing Haman and taking back the decree that would have killed the entire Jewish population. Because of Esther's bravery, the Jewish people were saved that day. You guys, this series we're talking about how we can find hope in dark times. I think this is such a perfect story to turn to as far as hope. I could imagine that season for them was super dark, completely terrifying. They were living in a season of unknown. They were living under the impression that in a few weeks they would all be slaughtered on one single day. But what they didn't know is that God was at work. God would not leave them to their destruction, but had a plan for them. And so what we learn from this story is that we can find hope in knowing that God's ways are far greater than we can understand. God is at work in ways that we likely don't even realize. But we also find hope in knowing that God uses people. He used Esther that day and that season to save his people. He used her bravery to save probably thousands of people from death on a single day. And he used Mordecai. He used Mordecai's encouragement to Esther to help her follow through with that brave act. And he also used the community. He used them and their fasting and their prayer to give Esther that kind of encouragement that she needed. So in seasons where we feel dark, when things are uncertain and when things are scary, we find hope in knowing that God's ways are higher than our ways. But we also find hope in knowing that God uses community and God uses one another, and that God may even be using you to bring hope to this world. You guys, I want to encourage you to live into the light of God's truth. Amidst this dark season, live into the hope of knowing that God is with us and that He's working on our behalf and through us.